The ground shook beneath Elder Zixka's feet as another explosion rocked the city above. Dust fell from the ceiling of the underground bunker where she stood with the last of her people's leaders. Through the thick walls they could hear the sounds of destruction as the enemy ships continued their attack. Zixa looked at the faces around her. These were beings who had lived for hundreds of years, who had seen their civilization grow from simple farmers to masters of space travel. Now they watched their world die through the screens that showed the surface. Their beautiful crystal cities were nothing but rubble. Their parks and gardens were burning wastelands. How many ships do they have left? Asked Commander Velo, his blue skin pale with fear. Too many, replied the military advisor. Our fleet is gone. Our defense systems are destroyed. They will break through our shields within hours. Zixa moved to the great communication array that took up half the bunker. This machine could send messages across the galaxy in moments, reaching any world. With the right equipment, for weeks, they had been sending calls for help to every civilized species they knew. The responses had been the same. The Altarian Federation said they were too busy with their own problems. The Crystal Empire said the Zelani were not worth saving. The Void Walkers, who were older than most stars, did not even reply. Send the message again, Zixa ordered. All frequencies, all languages. The technician at the controls looked up at her with eyes that glowed with despair. Elder, we have sent it 47 times. No one is coming. No one cares. Send it again, she repeated firmly. Zixa placed her hands on the transmitter controls. The smooth metal was warm under her 6 fingers. She had used this same equipment to send messages of joy when her people discovered new worlds, messages of friendship when they met other species, messages of celebration for their achievements. She would use it to beg for their lives. Took a deep breath and began to speak. This is Elder Zixa of the Zelani, people on the world you know as Kepler 44 to be. We are under attack by the Vorthech Empire. They came without warning. They gave us no chance to surrender. They're killing our children and destroying everything we have built over thousands of years. Her voice stayed calm even as another explosion shook the bunker. She had to be strong for her people. Our military is defeated. Our cities are in ruins. But we are still alive, hiding in whatever shelters we can find. We call upon any species that can hear this message to send help. We have knowledge of ancient star maps. We have technology for growing food in dead soil. We have music and art and stories that we have saved for 10,000 years. All of this we will share freely with anyone who helps us survive. She paused as the lights flickered. The enemy was getting closer to their location. If you cannot send military help, then send ships to save our people. Take our children to safety. Let our culture live, even if our world dies. Please, we are not asking for charity. We offer everything we have in return. Just do not let us disappear from the universe as if we never existed. The message went out in 17 different languages, each one programmed into the transmitter by their best linguists. It would reach hundreds of worlds within hours, thousands within days. Surely someone would answer. Surely someone would care. But Zixa had little hope left. The galaxy was full of species that were older, stronger, and richer than the Zelani. The great powers would not help them. Who would? Far across the galaxy in a small solar system that most star maps did not even bother to mark. The message arrived at a listening post built on the dark side of Earth's moon. The humans who worked there had been scanning space for signals for only 50 years. They were new to faster-than-light travel, new to the idea that other intelligent life existed at all. Captain Jake Morrison has been staring at star charts for 6 hours straight. His job was to watch for any signs of alien contact, but most days brought nothing more than radio waves from distant stars and the occasional meteor shower. His coffee was cold and his eyes were tired when the signal came through. At first he thought it was just another equipment malfunction. The computers started making sounds they had never made before, and symbols appeared on the screens that looked like no human language. Then the translation program that the scientists had been working on for years suddenly activated. The voice that came through the speakers was clearly not human. It was higher pitched than most human voices, with a musical quality that made it beautiful even in desperation. But the words it spoke made Morrison sit up straight in his chair. "Amy, get over here," he called to Lieutenant Amy Chen, who was working at another station across the room. "You need to hear this." Amy hurried over and listened as the message played again. She was the best language expert they had, someone who could speak 12 human languages and understand the basics of several others. As she heard the alien words translated into English, her face went pale. "Is this real?" she asked. "Not some kind of test or training exercise." Morrison checked the readings on his instruments. The signal was coming from a star system over 400 light-years away. The mathematical patterns embedded in the message matched no human technology. The quantum signature was unlike anything in their databases. "It's real," he said quietly. "We're listening to aliens begging for help." Emmy stared at the speaker as if she could see the beings who had sent the message. "What do we do?" "We report it," Morrison said, reaching for the secure communication line that connected Luna Station to Earth. "This goes straight to the top." Within an hour, the message had reached Admiral Patricia Kine at Fleet Command. Within 2 hours, it was on President Richard Hayes's desk. Within 3 hours, every important leader on Earth knew that humanity had received its first message from another intelligent species, and that message was a cry for help. The debate in the Global Defense Council was fierce but brief. Some argued that humanity barely had enough ships to protect their own solar system, let alone travel hundreds of light years to fight an unknown enemy. Others worried it might be a trap, a way to lure Earth's small fleet away from home. But Secretary of State Paul Jackson stood up and said the words that would change human history. "This is our first contact with alien life. How we respond will determine what kind of species we are. Do we ignore suffering because it's far away and we abandon innocent people because helping them might be dangerous? Or do we prove that humanity deserves a place among the stars?" The vote was close, but humanity's conscience won. Admiral Kane received her orders. "Prepare every available ship for immediate departure to the Zelani system back on Luna Station." Captain Morrison and Lieutenant Chen continued to monitor the alien transmissions. The messages were getting weaker as the Vorthok ships destroyed more of the Zelani communication equipment, but they could still hear Elder Zix's voice Still calling out across the void, still hoping that someone somewhere would answer, send a reply, Morrison ordered. Tell them help is coming. Amy's fingers trembled as she typed the response. It was humanity's first message to an alien species, and it was simple. Elzixka of the Zelani people, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the human species. We have received your message. Our fleet is preparing to come to your aid. Hold on. Help is coming. The message traveled across space at the speed of light, carrying with it humanity's first promise to the galaxy. They were young, they were weak, and they were untested. But they had heard the call for help, and they were coming. Captain Lisa Park stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant and looked out at the most incredible sight she'd ever seen, floating in space. Around her flagship were 11 other ships, every vessel that Earth could spare for this mission. Were not the largest ships ever built, and they were certainly not the most powerful, but they represented something that had never happened before in human history. Earth was sending its entire deep space fleet to help complete Stranger's Park had been chosen to lead the mission because she had more experience in deep space than any other human captain. She had led the first survey missions to nearby star systems. She had mapped asteroid fields and gas giant moons, and had spent more time in the dark between stars than most people spent on vacation. She had never led ships into battle, and she had certainly never fought aliens. Captain, all ships report ready for departure, said Commander Steve Adams, her second in command. He was a good man, steady and calm, exactly the kind of officer she needed beside her in the unknown. Park nodded and looked around her bridge. The crew was young, most of them volunteers who had signed up when the call went out across Earth for anyone willing to risk their lives for people they had never met. Engineer Bobby Martinez had left his comfortable job designing fusion reactors in California. Communications officer Nancy White had been a professor teaching alien languages at Harvard, though she had never expected to actually use them. Weapons officer Danny Sullivan was fresh from the Naval Academy, his family having served in Earth's military for 5 generations. They were all scared. Park could see it in their eyes, in the way they moved just a little too carefully, in the way they double-checked everything they did. But none of them had asked to stay behind. When they learned what the mission was about, any word from the Zelani? Park asked Nancy. The communications officer checked her screens, still receiving their distress signals. Captain, the transmissions are getting weaker, but Elder Zixa is still broadcasting. The computer estimates we have maybe 2 days before their equipment fails completely. 2 days to travel over 400 light years, find an alien world under attack, and somehow convince a superior enemy force to leave. Park had led difficult missions before, but nothing like this. Open a channel to the fleet, she ordered. Nancy worked at her controls for a moment, then nodded. All ships receiving. Captain Park took a deep breath. She had thought about what to say during the 3 days it had taken to prepare the fleet for departure. How do you inspire people to fight aliens they had never seen, to protect people they had never met in a place they had never been? Attention all ships, this is Captain Park. In a few minutes we will make the jump to hyperspace, and when we do, we will be making history. We are not just the first human military fleet to leave our solar system, we are the First species in this galaxy to answer a call for help from complete strangers. She paused, looking out at the ships. Floating around her, the U.S. Phoenix. Under Captain Carol Davis, the UES. Guardian under Captain Frank Johnson. The U.S. Courage under Captain Tim Brooks. Good ships, good crews, good people who deserve to know why they were risking their lives. And GT, the intelligence reports tell us we are outgunned and outnumbered. The enemy has bigger ships, better weapons, and more experience, every reasonable measure. We should not even try this mission, but reason is not why we are here. On the screens that showed the other ships, she could see crew members listening intently to her words. We are here because somewhere in space, people are dying, children are hiding in ruins, while their world burns around them. Civilization that has existed for thousands of years is about to disappear forever, and the only thing standing between them and extinction is us. Park felt the weight of command settle on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. 12 ships, 3,000 crew members, Earth's entire hope for making a good first impression on the galaxy. I will not lie to you, some of us may not come home, some of our ships may not survive what we find when we reach the Zelani system, but I can promise you this: whatever happens, we will not abandon those people. We will not let them die alone. We will show the galaxy what humanity means. She switched to the command frequency that only the other captains could hear. All ships, prepare for jump to hyperspace. Navigation coordinates are locked in for the Zelani system. Maximum speed, 1 by 1. The other captains reported ready. Captain Davis on the Phoenix, ready to jump. Admiral Captain Johnson on the Guardian, all systems green, standing by. Captain Brooks on the Courage, engines hot, waiting for your order. Park had not expected them to call her Admiral. She was still just a captain, leading this mission because someone had to do it, but she understood what they meant. Today she was not just commanding one ship, she was commanding humanity's first steps into a larger, more dangerous universe. Helm, take us to hyperspace, she ordered. The stars outside the bridge windows stretched into lines of light as the EU's Defiant jumped to faster than light speed. Around it, 11 other ships did the same, disappearing from normal space and entering the strange realm between dimensions where distance became meaningless and time moved differently. In hyperspace, the fleet could not communicate with each other or with Earth. They were alone with their thoughts and their fears, racing through the dark toward a world they had never seen, to fight an enemy they knew nothing about. On the bridge of the Defiant, Park walked from station to station, checking on her crew. At the navigation console, Lieutenant Helen Carter was monitoring their progress through hyperspace. At the engineering station, Bobby Martinez was keeping watch over the ship's reactor and engines. At communications, Nancy White was preparing the equipment they would need to talk to the Zelani when they arrived. Captain Danny Sullivan called from the weapon station. I've been running simulations on the combat data we received from the Zelani transmissions. The enemy ships are putting out energy readings that are 3 times higher than our weapons can produce. Park walked over to look at his screens. Numbers were not encouraging. According to the computer models, the Vorthog ships could destroy human vessels without even slowing down. What are you thinking, Danny? She asked the young Weapons officer looked up at her with worried eyes. I am thinking we need a new plan, Captain. Our standard combat tactics will not work against an enemy this powerful. Park nodded. She had been thinking the same thing since they left Earth. What would you suggest? Danny hesitated for a moment, then brought up another display on his screen. The Zelani sent us detailed scans of the enemy ships. Oh, they are big, heavily armored with weapons designed for long-range combat, but they seem to rely on their shields and armor for protection. They are not built for close quarters fighting. Go on, Park encouraged. What if we do not try to match them? Weapon for weapon, what if we use speed and surprise instead, getting in close? Hit them fast and use our maneuverability to avoid their big guns. It was a dangerous plan. Getting close to enemy ships meant giving up the safety of long-range combat, but it might be their only chance against a superior force. Start working on new tactics, Park ordered. Share your ideas with the other weapons officers. When we drop out of hyperspace, we may need every advantage we can get. The fleet continued its journey through hyperspace. Word of their mission was spreading across Earth. News reports showed crowds gathered in cities around the world, watching the sky and hoping for word from their small fleet. Churches held prayer services, schools showed students star charts of the distant Zelani system. Families of the crew members waited by their communication devices hoping for news. President Hayes held a press conference in which he tried to explain why Earth had committed its entire space navy to helping strangers. Some people have asked why we are risking our ships and our people for aliens we have never met, he said to the cameras. The answer is simple, because they asked for help and we heard them, because in this vast and dangerous universe, the only thing that separates civilization from barbarism is our willingness to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Back on the UES Defiant, Park sat in her command chair and watched the stars stream past. In a few hours they would reach the Zelani system. They would find out if their small fleet could stand against an alien empire. They would learn whether humanity's first steps into the galaxy would end in victory or disaster. But regardless of what they found when they arrived, they had already accomplished something important. They had proven that Earth would not stand by while innocent people suffered. They had shown that humanity deserved a place among the stars. Fleet flew on through hyperspace, carrying with it the hopes of two worlds and the future of human civilization. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zelani system, and Captain Lisa Park felt her heart sink at what she saw on the main screen. The planet Kepler 4, for it to be hung in space like a wounded animal, its surface glowing with the fires of burning cities around it, swarmed in nearly 200 alien warships, each one sleek and black like pieces of the void itself. My God, whispered Lieutenant Helen Carter from the sensor station. Captain, those ships are enormous. The smallest one is twice the size of our biggest cruiser. Park studied the tactical display that showed red dots representing enemy vessels scattered around the planet. Each rep represented firepower that could probably destroy her entire fleet. For a moment she wondered if bringing 12 ships against 200 had been the right decision. Are we detecting any Zelani ships? She asked. Helen checked her instruments and shook her head sadly. No, Captain. I am reading debris fields in several locations that might have been there. Defense fleet, but no active vessels. Through the static of jamming signals, I could still hear Elder Zix's voice, broadcasting from somewhere on the planet's surface. The alien's words were faint but clear. This is Elder Zixa to anyone who can hear this transmission. We are still alive. Our children are still alive. Please, if help is coming, come quickly. Park felt anger rise in her chest. These Vorthech had attacked a peaceful world without warning, destroyed an entire civilization's defenses, and now they were hunting down survivors like animals. Captain Nancy White called from communications. We are receiving a transmission from the enemy fleet. Put it on screen, Park ordered. The image that appeared was of a creature that looked like someone had tried to build a human but had gotten the proportions wrong. Its head was too large, its arms too long, and its skin was a pale gray color that reminded Park of old metal. When it spoke, its voice was cold and mechanical. Unknown vessel, this is Warm Master Krexel of the Vorthech Empire. You are interfering with an authorized conquest operation. Identify yourselves and state your business here. Park stood up from her command chair and smoothed her uniform. This would be humanity's first official conversation with a hostile alien species, and she wanted to get it right. This is Captain Lisa Park of the United Earth Navy. We received a distress call from the Zelani people requesting aid. We are here to provide that aid. The alien's face twisted into what might have been a smile, though it looked more like a threat display. United Earth Navy have never heard of your species. How many ships do you command? 12, Park replied. Honestly, Workstall made a sound that the translation computer identified as laughter. 12 primitive vessels against the might of the Vorthech Empire. Your species must be either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Why don't you find out which? Park said, then switched to the fleet frequency. All ships, this is Admiral Park. Form attack formation. Weapons free. Protect those people at all costs. What happened next would be studied by military historians for centuries to come, though most of them would conclude that the human victory was impossible and the battle reports must have been exaggerated. The Vorthech fleet moved to intercept the humans with the confidence of predators approaching prey. Their ships were larger, their weapons more powerful, and their shields stronger than anything the humans possessed. By every measure of military science, the battle should have been over in minutes, but the humans did not fight like any species the Vorth had ever countered. Instead of trying to match the enemy, ship for ship, the human fleet split into 4 groups and attacked from different directions at the same time. Instead of staying at long range where the Vortex heavy weapons would be most effective, they closed a point-blank distance where their smaller guns could penetrate enemy shields. Captain Carol Davis of the UES Phoenix led her destroyer straight at a Vorth heavy cruiser, firing everything she had while enemy plasma bolts scorched her whole. Her ship shuddered under the impact of alien weapons, but she kept coming. Phoenix, too defiant, she called over the radio, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. I am going to ram this target. Tell my family I died for something worthwhile. Carol, no, Park shouted, but it was too late. The Phoenix struck the Vorth cruiser amidships at full speed, both ships exploding in a ball of superheated plasma that lit up the space around. Them, on the bridge of the Defiant. Danny Sullivan stared at his weapons. Console in shock. Captain, did she just sacrifice her ship to take out one enemy? Vessel, she did, Park replied grimly. Then opened a channel to the rest of the fleet. All ships, you saw what Captain Davis accomplished. Sometimes the best weapon we have is our willingness to use it. The other human captains understood immediately this was not going to be a traditional space battle with neat formations and careful tactics. This was going to be a fight where victory mattered more than survival. Captain Frank Johnson of the UES Guardian found himself surrounded by 3 Vorthach destroyers. His shields were failing and his engines were damaged, but instead of trying to escape, he turned toward the nearest enemy ship. Guardian to all ships, he broadcast, remember us when you tell this story. He overloaded his ship's reactor and crashed into the lead Vorak vessel. The explosion took out all 4 ships, but it cleared the way for 2 other human vessels to escape. Trap, the Vorth were beginning to realize they were fighting something they had never encountered before. Most species, when faced with superior firepower, either surrendered or tried to minimize their losses. Humans seemed to view their own ships as ammunition. Oh, this is madness, Warm Master Creel screamed over the communication channel. They are destroying themselves to hurt us. What kind of species does this? Captain Tim Brooks of the UES Courage answered him by ramming his crippled ship into the Vorthach flagship's engine section. The impact did not destroy the massive alien vessel, but it crippled its ability to maneuver and left it drifting helplessly. Park watched from the bridge of the Defiant as her fleet traded their lives for tactical advantage. It was heartbreaking to see good ships and brave crews sacrifice themselves, but it was also working. The Vorach formation was breaking apart as captains tried to avoid the suicidal human attacks. Captain Helen Carter reported, enemy fleet is showing signs of panic. Several ships are moving away from the planet. Danny, target their command ship. Park ordered, if we can take out their leader, the rest might retreat. Aye, Captain, Danny replied, programming the ship's missiles for a concentrated attack on Warm Master Crex's vessel. But before the Defiant could fire, Captain Mary Walsh of the UES Reliant came racing past them, her ship trailing atmosphere from multiple hull breaches. Reliant to Defiant, she called, I have lost life support and my weapons are offline. I'm going to make this count. Park could only watch as the Reliant accelerated toward the Vorth command ship, using the last of its engine power to build up speed. The alien vessel's defensive guns tried to stop the incoming human ship, but Captain Walsh had angled her approach to minimize the target profile. The collision tore the front section off the Vorthach flagship and sent both ships spinning out of control. Park saw escape pods launching from the Reliant just before both vessels exploded. Without their command ship, the Vorth fleet began to fall apart. Individual captains made their own decisions about whether to continue fighting or preserve their ships. Most chose preservation. Enemy fleet is retreating, Helen announced hardly believing her own words. Long-grain sensors show multiple ships jumping to hyperspace. Park slumped back in her command chair, exhausted and grief-stricken. They had won, but the cost had been terrible. Of the 12 ships that had entered the system, only 3 remained. the Defiant, the U.S. Valor under Captain Robert Lee, and the UES Liberty under Captain Jennifer Stone. Nancy opened a channel to the planet. Park ordered the face that appeared on the screen was Elder Zixa, and the alien leader was clearly struggling to believe what she had witnessed. Humans of Earth, she said, her voice filled with wonder. You came when all the galaxy turned away. From our cries for help you came, you sacrificed your ships and your people. For strangers you had never met. Why would you do such a thing? Why could you? Looked around her bridge at the surviving members of her crew. They were exhausted, wounded, and mourning their lost friends, but their eyes showed no regret for what they had done, 'cause it was the right thing to do, Park said. Simply, no one should have to face extinction alone. Elder Zixa was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her words would be recorded and broadcast across the galaxy. In our oldest stories we have legends of a species that would someday come from the outer darkness. People who would hear the cries of those in need and answer them regardless of the cost. We thought they were just myths, never imagined they would be real. Elder Zixa stood in the ruins of what had once been the greatest library on her world and looked up at the sky for the first time. In 3 weeks there were no enemy ships blocking out the stars, the black Vorthog vessels that had brought death and destruction to her people were gone, replaced by 3 small human ships that orbited her planet like protective guardians around her. Other Zelani were emerging from their hiding places. They came out of underground shelters, from collapsed buildings, from caves in the mountains where they had fled when the attacks began. Many were injured, all were frightened, but they were alive. The impossible had happened. Help had actually come, Elder said. One of her advisors, a young Zelani named Kexlo, whose blue skin was covered in dust from the rubble. The human captain wants to speak with you again. She says they are sending down medical supplies and food. Zixon nodded and walked to the communication equipment that her people had managed to keep working throughout the siege. The device was damaged and held together with spare parts, but it still functioned well enough for her to talk to the beings who had saved her world. Captain Park, she said when the human's face appeared on the screen, our people are coming out of hiding. We have many wounded who need medical attention, and our food production facilities were destroyed in the first attacks. The human captain looked tired. Her uniform was torn in several places, and there was a bandage on her left arm, but her eyes were kind and determined. We already preparing supply drops, Elder Zixa. Our medical teams will be down to the surface within the hour. We also have engineers who can help repair your power systems and water treatment plants, Captain Zixa said. Carefully, we must ask why you did this. Your people lost 9 ships, saving us. Hundreds of your crew members died for strangers they had never met. This is not normal behavior in our galaxy. Captain Park was quiet for a moment, and Zixa could see other humans working at stations behind her on the ship's bridge. Elder, can I ask you something? If you had received a distress call from Earth, if you had known that human children were dying and human cities were burning, what would you have done? The question surprised Zixa. She thought about it seriously, imagining her people's response. If they had heard cries for help from across the stars, we would have wanted to help, she admitted. Our leaders would have said it was too dangerous, too expensive, too Far away, they would have said we needed to protect our own people first. That is what most of our leaders said too. Captain Park replied. But in the end we decided that protecting innocent people was more important than protecting ourselves. That is what it means to be human, Elder Zixa. We do not abandon those in need, no matter how dangerous it might be, to help them. Over the following days, 3 surviving human ships worked around the clock to help the Zelani rebuild their civilization. Medical shuttles flew between the ships and the planet's surface, carrying supplies and doctors to treat the wounded. Engineering teams beamed down to repair power plants and communication arrays. Even the ship's cooks helped, preparing meals for Zelani refugees who had lost everything. The humans worked with a dedication that amazed the Zelani. Lieutenant Bobby Martinez, the chief engineer from the UES Defiant, spent 18 hours straight repairing a water treatment facility that served 50,000 people. When Zelani workers told him to rest, he just smiled and said he could sleep when everyone had clean water to drink. Nancy White, the communications officer, worked with Zelani linguists to improve the translation programs that allowed the 2 species to understand each other. She was fascinated by the musical quality of the Zelani language and spent her off-duty hours learning to speak it properly. Your language is beautiful, she told one of her Zelani colleagues. It sounds like singing even when you are talking about technical matters. Danny Sullivan, the young weapons officer, helped Zani children who had lost their parents in the attacks. He could not speak their language very well, but he knew how to make them laugh by making funny faces and showing them pictures of Earth animals on his tablet computer. But it was Captain Park herself who had the most important conversations. She spent hours talking with Elder Zixa and the other Zelani leaders, learning about their history and culture. The Zelani had been exploring space for over 2,000 years, much longer than humans. They had met dozens of different species and had built a peaceful civilization based on knowledge and art. We never developed powerful weapons, Zixa explained as they walked through the ruins of her capital city. We believed that intelligent species could solve their problems through discussion and compromise. The Vor taught us how. Wrong we were about that. You were not wrong, Captain Park said firmly. Vorak were wrong. Violence should never be the first choice, but sometimes it is the only choice left when dealing with bullies. They stopped at what had once been a school. The building was mostly destroyed, but Zelani workers were already clearing away the rubble and making plans to rebuild it. Children who had survived the attack were playing in the courtyard, their laughter a beautiful sound after weeks of silence. In fear, how long will your ship stay? Zixa asked. As long as you need us, Park replied. We want to make sure you are safe before we leave. We want to make sure the Vortho do not come back. But even as the humans worked to help the Zelani recover, word of the battle was spreading across the galaxy through the hyperspace communication networks that connected civilized worlds. The news that primitive species had defeated one of the galaxy's most feared military forces was shocking enough, but the details of how they had done it were even more surprising. On the world of Alter Prime, the Federation Council met in emergency session to discuss the implications of humanity's victory. They sacrificed their own ships to destroy enemy Vessels, reported Admiral Velcro, the Federation's military commander. Our analysts say it was tactically brilliant, but strategically insane. What kind of species values the lives of strangers more than their own survival? Chancellor Dexmer, the Federation's leader, studied the reports with growing interest. Perhaps the kind of species we should have helped when they first asked for aid. Send a message to this Captain Park. Tell her the Altarian Federation would like to establish diplomatic relations with Earth. Similar conversations were happening on worlds across the galaxy. The crystalline hegemony, who had ignored the Zelanis pleas for help, now wanted to know more about these humans who had answered them, the Void Walkers, ancient beings who rarely paid attention to younger species, began monitoring human communications for the first time in centuries. But the biggest changes were happening in the Vorthech Empire itself. Warm Master Krexel had survived the destruction of his flagship, but his reputation had not. Word was spreading through the Empire that their mighty fleet had been defeated by 12 primitive ships crewed by beings who fought like madmen on conquered worlds throughout Vorthech space. Enslaved populations began to whisper about the humans who had saved the Zelani. If 12 human ships could defeat 200 Vorth vessels, what could a 100 human ships do? What about 1,000? Rebellions began to break out on worlds that had been under Vorthech control for decades. The Empire's military was forced to pull ships away from conquest operations to deal with uprisings at home. For the first time in centuries, the Vorthech expansion had been stopped. Back on Kepler 442, Elder Zixa stood with Captain Park, the observation deck of a temporary shelter that the humans had helped build. Through the transparent walls they could see Zelani and human workers laboring side by side to rebuild the damaged city. Your people have given us more than just our lives, Zixa said. You have given us hope that the galaxy can be a better place than we thought it was. We've given each other hope, Part corrected. Before we met your people, humans wondered if we would ever find friends among the stars. Now we know that friendship is possible even between species who have never met before. Above them, the 3 human ships continued their patient vigil, ready to defend the Zelani world if the Vorthech returned. But both Captain Park and Elder Zixa suspected that would not be necessary. The galaxy had learned something important from the Battle of Kepler 44. To be, sometimes the smallest forces could achieve the greatest victories if they were fighting for the right reasons. 2 years after the Battle of Kepler 442b, Admiral Lisa Park stood in the command center of Haven Station and watched the most incredible sight in human history. Through the massive viewing window, she could see ships from dozens of different species docking at the station's many ports. There were the crystalline vessels of the hegemony, the flowing organic ships of the Altarian Federation, and the ancient metal hulks that belong to the Void Walkers. All of them had come to meet with humanity. Haven Station had been built at the exact coordinates where the human fleet had first jumped into the Zelani system. It served as Earth's embassy to the galaxy, but it had become much more than that. It had become a symbol of what could happen when someone was willing to help strangers in need, Admiral said. Captain Robert Lee, who now served as Park's chief of staff, the Alaran delegation has arrived. They are requesting an immediate meeting about The defense treaty, Park nodded and smoothed her uniform. In the 2 years since the battle, she had been promoted to admiral and put in charge of humanity's rapidly growing space fleet. Earth now had over 200 ships, many of them built with technology shared by grateful alien species, but the most important changes were not in the number of ships or the advanced weapons they carried. The most important changes were in the galaxy itself. The Vorthach Empire, once the most feared military force in known space, had collapsed completely after their defeat at Kepler 44 Taub. Rebellions had broken out on every world they controlled. Species that had been enslaved for centuries remembered what freedom felt like and fought to get it back. Warm Master and GT Axel and GT had been killed by his own officers. After 3 more defeats at the hands of rebel fleets, the remaining Vorthach forces had retreated to their home system, where they were under siege by a coalition of their former victims. Any word from the Zelani? Park asked as they walked through the station's corridors toward the diplomatic section. Elder Zixa sends her regards, Captain Lee replied. The reconstruction of their home world is almost complete. And GT reporting that 15 new species have requested membership in what they are calling the Humanitarian Alliance. And GT, Park smiled at that. And GT, okay. And GT, the Humanitarian Alliance had been Elder Zixa's idea, a group of species committed to helping others in need, just as humanity had helped the Zelani. It had started with just Earth and Kepler 4 to be, but it was growing rapidly as more civilizations decided they wanted to be part of something better than the old system of looking out for only themselves. They entered the main conference room, where representatives from 17 different species were waiting. Park had met most of them before, but she was still amazed by the variety of life the galaxy contained. There was Ambassador Telnara of the Altarians, whose people looked like tall, graceful humans with silver skin. There was Counselor Vex Prim of the Crystalline Hegemony, whose body was made of living crystal that changed colors as he thought. But the most impressive guest was Ancient One Zephyr of Dioid, one of the Void Walkers who had been traveling between stars since before most species had developed fire. The being was so old that it remembered when the galaxy had only a few thousand civilized worlds instead of the millions that existed now. Admiral Park, the Ancient One, said in a voice that sounded like distant thunder, "Your species continues to surprise us. We first detected your signals 50 years ago. We assumed you would follow the same pattern as most young civilizations. You would explore nearby systems, establish colonies, build an empire, and spend centuries fighting wars with your neighbors." Instead, added Ambassador Telnara, you heard a cry for help from strangers and risked everything to answer it. You changed the entire balance of power in this galaxy. With 12 ships and an idea, Park took her seat at the head of the conference table. We did not set out to chain anything, we just did what seemed right. That is what makes it so remarkable, said Counselor Vexprim. Most species need centuries of philosophy and debate to decide what is right. Humans seem to know it instinctively. The meeting lasted for several hours as the various ambassadors discussed trade agreements, mutual defense treaties, and joint exploration missions, but the most important topic was the one that Ancient One Zephyr brought up near the end. There have been 17 more distress calls in the past year, the Void Walker said. Species under attack by raiders, worlds threatened by natural disasters, colonies facing starvation each time. The first ships to respond have been human, added Telnara. Other species have followed your example. The galaxy is becoming a more civilized place because humanity showed us what civilization really means. After the meeting ended, Park walked to her private office and sat down at her desk. Through the window, she could see the memorial wall that had been built on the outer ring of the station. It listed the names of every human who had died at Kepler 4 to be, along with the names of all the aliens who had died in the conflicts that followed. There were a lot of names on that wall. There were also a lot of species that were still alive because someone had been willing to fight for them. Her computer chimed with an incoming message. It was from Captain Jake Morrison, the man who had first received the Zelani distress call at Luna Station, was now in command of the UES Defender, one of the new heavy cruisers that patrolled the outer regions looking for anyone who needed help. Admiral, his message read, we have received another distress call. A species called the Corvani in the Vega system. They're under attack by pirates and requesting immediate assistance. I'm moving to intercept, but I could use backup. Park smiled and opened a communication channel to the fleet operations center. This is Admiral Park. Prepare Battle Group 7 for immediate departure to the Vega system. Captain Morrison needs backup within minutes. 6 human ships were racing through hyperspace toward another world in trouble. They would arrive to find that they were not alone. Ships from the Altarian Federation were already on their way, along with vessels from the Crystalline Hegemony and even one of the ancient Void Walker dreadnoughts. The galaxy had learned humanity's lesson. Well, no one should face danger alone. That evening, Park stood on the observation deck with Elder Zixa, who had come to Haven Station for the anniversary ceremony commemorating the battle that had saved her world. They watched as supply ships loaded with food and medical supplies departed for refugee camps throughout the galaxy. Do you ever regret it? Zixa asked. Your people could have stayed in your own solar system, built your own empire, avoided all the dangers that come with helping others. Park thought about all the friends she had lost, all the battles they had fought, all the sleepless nights worrying about distant worlds under attack. Then she thought about the children playing in the rebuilt schools on Kepler 44 to be the former slaves who were now free on dozens of worlds, the species that had survived disasters because someone had answered their call for help. Never, she said firmly. This is who we are supposed to be. This is what it means to be human. Above them the stars shone down on a galaxy that was safer, kinder, and more hopeful than it had been just 2 years before. And in the depths of space, monitoring stations built by a dozen different species listened constantly for the sounds of those in need when the calls came. And GT, as they always did, the response was always the same. First would come the human ships racing through hyperspace with supplies and weapons and the absolute determination to help. Then would come the others, inspired by humanity's example to be better than they had been before. The galaxy had learned to hear the cries of those in need. More importantly, it had learned to answer them in the communication centers of Haven Station. Operators from multiple species worked together to maintain the emergency network that now covered most of the known galaxy. Above their workstations was a sign in dozens of languages, but the message was always the same: we are listening, we will come. This is our promise to the stars. And in the farthest reaches of space, species that had never heard of humanity or Earth picked up faint radio signals, carrying a simple message: if you need help, call us, someone will answer. The galaxy was no longer a place where the strong preyed on the weak and cries for help went unanswered. It had become something better, something more civilized, something worthy of the countless species that called it home. All because one young species had heard a stranger's plea for help and decided that doing the right thing was more important than being safe.